All right. Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I am super excited to be here today because this is a very special live class today. As you might be seeing, this opening slide is a little bit different for our usual students. We are hosting a very special group today. We are actually live today on our Magoosh YouTube channel broadcasting out, and we have a number of guests joining us. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's live class. Let's get started because we have a lot of ground to cover in today's class. Now, before I move on, just want to call out that if you are joining us from YouTube, we have a special promo code for all of you today. It's on the screen. You're going to see it a few more times throughout class, but that's going to be good for $50 off a Premium Plus Classes purchase. All right, so let's get started here. Today's class is how to assimilate GRE vocabulary. I think this is arguably one of the most important topics in your GRE prep. It's one that as a tutor I've been asked about over and over the years, and for good reason, right? The GRE is notorious for vocabulary. So let's learn how to do this. How do we actually improve our vocabulary efficiently, effectively, and enjoyably for this test? So let me start by introducing myself. I'm Mason. I work here at Magoosh, obviously. I work as a live class instructor and on our YouTube team as well. I love coffee, dogs, and backpacking. Those are sort of the three big loves of my life. And I live in, as you can see, very sunny Las Vegas, Nevada with my partner Sarah and our two lovable, if rowdy, dogs. So if you hear any dogs in the background, those are my dogs. All right. A little bit of housekeeping starting today's class off. We are going to be recording this class, and you'll get that recording afterwards in an email with some additional resources as well. So keep an eye open for that. We're also going to have breaks throughout today's class for questions and answers. You can submit those anytime, and this is a great moment to introduce both of our chat support today. We have Brian helping us out in Zoom, so everyone say hi to Brian, and we have Mika helping us out in YouTube. So everyone send Brian and Mika your questions, say hi to them. They're going to be responding to some, and they'll send the rest to me. So make sure you take advantage of that. Be prepared to participate. I'm going to rely on all of you to help me out today. We're going to learn new words together. That's the best way to learn. And lastly, if you have a question after class that we don't get to, which is very possible, we have a huge group today, which I'm super excited about. You can always email us at any time at help@magoosh.com. We can take the conversation over there. Lastly, last bit of housekeeping, there is a handout included for today's class. This is a resource for all of you just with, it's going to have a sort of a rundown of our major strategies today and a number of really high quality resources to jumpstart you on this vocabulary journey. Brian's going to be sharing it out in Zoom. Mika will share it out in YouTube, and you'll get it afterwards in that email as well. So you're going to have several places to access it, and that's for you to follow along with today. So make sure you do check that out. Okay, so let's talk through what our goals are for today's class. By the end of our class, the following hopefully will have occurred. All of us are going to learn some new words. We're going to know the meanings of the following words, but more than that, we're going to know how to use them correctly in a sentence, and we'll have taken steps to ensure that they stick in our memories. Pretty awesome, right? Let's check out our sort of our little cluster of words here. Now, maybe some of these are familiar, maybe not. They're all high quality GRE words. There's also going to be some bonus words throughout today's class, so keep your eyes open for those. I want to call out as well, do the best you can to refrain from Googling definitions during class. Treat this like a real GRE test where you're not going to have that tool. You're going to learn new words, but we're going to do that partially through context, and it's really important to build that skill. So try to keep off Google if you can. Our goals for today's class are to understand the importance of learning vocab words and learn where to find them. Honestly, it's a great place to start. We're also going to learn some techniques for making these words stick in a lasting way, and that's a life skill that extends beyond the GRE. It's going to serve you well in grad school and beyond. And lastly, we're going to learn how to become word detectives. That means getting familiar with things like prefixes and roots, for when you do see a word that you don't know, which I promise you is going to happen on your test. I do this for a living, and I still take tests where I see a word and I'm like, I either have no idea what that is or I just haven't seen it in a long time, and that's when these other skills come into play. Okay, who is this class for? It's for students who are just trying to build their vocab in order to improve their verbal score. And this class is especially helpful for those of you maybe super early in this process, but it should contain something for everyone. I think everyone can take away some tips and tricks from today's class to help you retain vocabulary words. All right, I'm going to toggle off my webcam here so that we can all focus on the slides. And let's start with part one, which is asking the question, well, how important is vocabulary really? This is a question I get often as a tutor, and it's an important one, so let's take it seriously. So here's a breakdown. We at Magoosh are nerds about all this stuff. We are super data driven, and so we've studied this test, and what we've determined is around 50%, pretty much half of your questions on a given section are going to be vocabulary driven. And of course, those come, most apparent in those question types like sentence equivalence and text completion. Both of these rely on some advanced vocab. Now, some RC passages might also incorporate a lot of this GRE vocabulary as well. Sometimes it's central to solving a question, sometimes not, but in either case, you're going to be better served by knowing the meanings of many, many words, regardless of what you're being tested on. That's part of good comprehension. So obviously vocabulary is pretty important. It's kind of easy to maybe underplay the importance of vocabulary, but it is a crucial skill being tested on the GRE. Now that prompts another very natural question, which is, well then how many words should I strive to learn? And this answer is a little bit more complicated. So my position here is to learn as many words as you can, with the caveat that you should never sacrifice time or effort on other areas of the GRE. Yes, vocab is important to doing well on the verbal sections, but the verbal sections, they're called verbal reasoning for a reason, right? They're not vocabulary tests in as much as they are logic tests. So you don't want to sacrifice building up other important skills like sentence deconstruction, inferences, all these other skills you have to build in favor of just doing vocabulary. I'll also say that it depends on the person and it depends on your score goals. If you have a high score goal, let's say you're going for a 160 plus, which is a very strong score, that is by necessity going to mean you're going to spend more time and effort developing vocabulary unless you're coming in with a really robust vocabulary. Maybe that's true. So basically, the higher your score goal, the more time you're going to have to budget for learning vocabulary. On average, just to give you a kind of a baseline here, adults are able to learn between 15 and 20 new words per day. Again, on average, meaning that some people can do more than that and others can do less. If you're just starting out, see how that goes. How does 15 to 20 new words feel every day? And adjust. Are you able to keep those words? Or do you find that if you're learning them on Monday, by Wednesday you've forgotten 3/4 of them? That's a sign that you should reduce that workload until you get better at this. So that is all a long way of saying that it depends. And you should focus on the most common or high frequency words first, which I'm about to describe in more detail. But let me ask you a question. I'm going to launch a poll here. Mika's going to put this out on YouTube as well. Where should we be looking for vocab words? And I just want to get a sense for where you all are currently looking for vocab words. All right, answers are flooding in here. 3 more seconds. Get your vote locked in. All right, let's check it out. So I'm going to share my results here. So yeah, there's definitely a spectrum here. A lot of students liked DRE, rather, all of the above and more. Really glad to see that. So this is a big idea. This is sort of going to be a special time in your life where words are going to take on a special importance. Because the truth is, while you're studying for the GRE, there's no bad place to be learning new vocabulary words. You should be keeping your eyes open at all times, and that means while you're watching Netflix, while you're reading news articles in the morning over your coffee, you should be on the lookout for brand new words that can maybe help you on this test and beyond. Now, that being said, there's no wrong place to look for words. However, there of course are some resources that are going to be richer and far more applicable than others. And I have to say, I think our vocabulary apps are a really great sort of foundation for you to build on. They're free to everyone, by the way. So if you don't have a Magoosh subscription, hey, don't worry about it. Go to the App Store, check these out. I'm just going to describe some differences really quick. Our vocabulary flashcard app is sort of how it sounds, right? You're going to be shown flashcards with words and definitions, and importantly also, you know what, I'm just going to test drive one of these. Let's just check it out because you're all kind of along for the ride today. So if you download the app, again, you can find that in your Android app or the App Store. You're going to open it up and this is what you find. Hey, wow, there is a lot of different words here. That's awesome. So, but how do we know which cards or which decks to prioritize? Well, each deck has about 50 words. And you'll see that they're kind of broken down in categories. We have common words, we have basic words, and farther down we have advanced words. So for most of you starting out, or if you have a kind of a fairly modest verbal score goal, you should be really focusing your time in these common word decks. These are words that commonly appear on the GRE, right? So these are ones you want to absolutely have nailed because there's a high probability you could encounter them on a test. So when we open one of these up, what do we find? We find a word, and that's it. This is where you have to pause and ask, can I come up with a definition to this if I'm just put on the spot? And then once you've arrived yes or no, you click it, and it's going to show you what the word means, of course. And importantly, it's going to show you an example sentence. Don't ignore that. That is gold. It is showing you how that word is used correctly in context. And that's a huge skill on the GRE. And then you have to kind of self-report here. Did I know this word? Or hey, if I'm being honest, I didn't know what finality meant. If that's fine, if you click that, it's just going to mean you're going to continue to learn and review those words until you have them mastered. So that is how this app works. Now, the Vocabulary Builder app is a little bit different. It looks similar, but it's laid out in more of a quiz mode. And again, we're kind of breaking these down by basic, intermediate, advanced words. And the difference here is that once you open up one of these levels, it's going to be more of like a multiple choice quiz. And this is a great way to sort of cement your understanding of that word. Can I come up with a good synonym here for irrefutable? Keeping in mind that I always have that I'm not sure answer, and be honest about that. Well, irrefutable, well, to refute something is to deny it, so it's irrefutable. Maybe I can't deny it, so it's probably certain. Haha. Great, I got it correct. And once again, we're going to see a great example sentence here as well. So I would recommend, honestly, using both of these apps in tandem. Start with that flashcard app, get familiar with the words, and then use the Builder app to make sure you're retaining those words, that you can do well in those kinds of quizzes. Lastly, we do have a great ebook. We have vocabulary ebooks if you're someone that prefers to sort of read clusters of words all in the same space. Or if you're someone like me who spends a lot of his weekends out in the woods, it's a great printable material that you can take with you if you don't have your phone on you. So we're going to talk more about utilizing these resources moving forward. But I want to finish this opening section with a couple of pro tips. These are things that I've discovered through experience working both myself and with students that really helped me make this whole vocabulary process manageable. So the first thing I want to call out is that for most people, especially in adulthood, vocabulary is difficult to build quickly and or inconsistently. You're better served doing a little bit every day, making it part of your routine, as opposed to trying to just cram words into a short window of space. That's not going to go well in the long run. So do a little bit every day. You can also build your own flashcards. There are great platforms online like Quizlet, and this is going to help you keep track of those new words you encounter while listening to podcasts or watching TV. And lastly, you should rely on these high-quality word lists, like those you find in our apps, as your primary resources, but keep your eyes and ears open for new words at all times to avoid a blinkered study approach. And of course, if the italics in different color didn't give it away, we have our first new word alert, okay? So now we're gonna start doing this. Let's start learning some words together today. But before we do that, are there any pressing questions at this point, either Mika or Brian, that you want to throw at me?
I got a few here we can run through. First, when we think about GRE vocabulary and we think about like hard and very hard level questions, how important is the vocabulary there? How common are those like hardest vocab questions? Or to put it another way, how much vocabulary can I get away with not knowing at that higher level?
Great question. So here's what I would say. I've also in the past created verbal test questions for Magoosh here. And when I'm tasked to create a hard or very hard problem, let's say it's a text completion problem, I can make it difficult in two different ways. I can either utilize, fairly advanced, more obscure GRE vocabulary in the sentence and of course in the answer choices, or I can make the sentence structure itself seem pretty complicated and convoluted, full of shifts, punctuation. We're going to have, compound sentences linking many clauses together, all of which is meant to sort of fluster and distract. And so those are two different kinds of difficulty that require different kinds of skills. And of course, sometimes you get a problem that is difficult in both of those ways. That for me is a sign like, that's a problem I'm going to be very comfortable skipping on the first pass through a section. I'd rather work on that at the end and take a total guess if I have to. But if that's where you have to be building two different sets of skills up, yes, prepping for that advanced vocabulary is going to help you. However, I would argue that at those advanced levels, it's almost more important that you're able to deconstruct and simplify the sentence. If you get really good clarity on what the sentence is doing and what kind of word must fit in that blank, that alone is going to help you hopefully at least eliminate some wrong answer choices and just increase your odds of guessing correctly, even on words that you're not familiar with. We're going to talk more about that later in today's class, but that's where you do have to be learning. In order to get that kind of high score, a 160 plus, that does mean you're going to have to nail some of these advanced vocab words, but I would argue that the other skills are almost more important at that level. What else do we have, Brian?
Okay, we'll try to combine some questions here. Are the Magoosh flashcards enough to get a good verbal score? Do I need to go to outside resources to help build my vocabulary as well?
Yeah, great question. So I would say that they should really provide you with a fantastic foundation, especially if you can get through all of the decks, including all those advanced decks, with a high degree of retention. You should be in really great shape. Now, that being said, you're also going to be doing things in your study approach, or hopefully you are, including obviously working on a lot of practice problems, hopefully through Magoosh, maybe through other companies like ETS as well. You're going to be taking practice tests, right? Full-length practice tests. These are also really important resources for learning new words. So anytime you miss a problem, always investigate, did I miss it because of unfamiliar vocab? And hey, if I did, then I should learn that vocab because it appeared once in a practice problem, and that's a good indication it could appear on an official test as well. So I would say, if you're someone who's disciplined about always farming practice questions for vocabulary, in addition to our vocab lists, and I gotta say this at the start, if you're someone who reads a lot, and enjoys reading and enjoys learning new words, that might be sufficient. But again, it really depends on those score goals. It depends on what kind of vocabulary you're starting off with. All right, really, really good questions. We're going to have more time for questions after our next section here. So let's keep going for now. And just want to call out again, you have that promo code, all of you YouTubers. Make sure you take note of that so that you get that discount. Okay, that brings us into part 2. And I'm going to share with you today my 7-step method for mastering, not just learning, mastering a GRE vocabulary word. If you can do these 7 steps, I promise you, this word is yours to keep. So, how do we do this in action? So as I pointed out a few slides ago, I dropped a new word into the sentence here. And this is a GRE vocabulary word. And maybe you're working on practice problems, you're doing some reading comprehension practice, or you're just reading for pleasure or for school, and you come across a new word that you don't know. This is sort of like what I call organic discovery. This is discovering a word in its natural habitat, right, in context. And this is a hugely important skill on the GRE. So rather than just rushing to look this word up, the first step we should do when we hit a new word is just reread the sentence. Just pause at that point. I do this all the time in my personal life, where I hit a new word and I have to back up and say, okay, what did I just read? Can I maybe, and then the next part is can I hazard a guess based on the context as to what that word might mean and come up with some kind of replacement word that might also work? This is hugely important. This is basically, in a way, this is what text completion is really pushing us to do. So let's do that with this word. Based on the sentence I've provided, what word might you plug in as a substitute for blinkered based on the context of the sentence? So go ahead and throw that in the chat, or actually rather in the Q&A, and I'll take a look at a few of your suggestions. All right, so we have words coming in like unfocused, narrow, okay, staggered, wasted, all right, blank, temporary, incomplete. So wow, we actually have kind of a wide variety of words that maybe are somewhat related, but some of them are quite different. We have words like flustered, broken, fluctuating. So this is I'm really glad we're doing this. It's important. I would keep your word in mind here, and let's go back and we're going to look at this sentence again. But once you do that, once you sort of push yourself to come up with that guess, right? And you might not be right, but push yourself to at least guess as to what that word might mean. And then go up and look at the definition of the word, because this is going to kind of prove or confirm whether you were right. Did you pick up on the right context clues? And so in this case, blinkered means to have a limited outlook or understanding. So for those of you that had words that meant something like narrow or limited or hindered, you were right on here, because that's kind of what blinkered means. So at this point, that's step 3, is actually look up the definition of your word. An optional step that I like to call out, if you are a total dork like I am, you might be interested in things like etymologies. And these are the histories or origins of words. I find them both deeply fascinating to learn where words come from, but it's also a great technique in getting sort of really strange words or words that you're finding a tough time remembering. This is another technique to remember them. Because the true etymology of this word, blinkered, comes from the blinkers that are put on racing horses to prevent them from becoming distracted. So now when you see this word blinkered, this is the image that should come to mind. You're building this kind of richer association with that word. So etymologies can be very useful for that. And I've included an etymology resource in your handout so that you can do this occasionally. I think it's really interesting as well. So that is sort of the optional kind of sub-step 3. What do we do next? At this point, a lot of students are like, okay, I'm done. I looked up the definition. I got it. Well, you could do that, and you would learn the word, but I don't think you would quite master the word. The next thing you should do is come up with here's a second example, actually, before we do that, of how etymologies can help us out, all right? So our next word is jejune, which means dull, insipid, boring, lackluster, and the etymology is kind of interesting. It's derived from the second part of the small intestine, the jejunum, where the inside walls absorb the food's nutrients. Now, I want to call out that might be deeply fascinating to some people. If you are a doctor that specializes in this area, great. But for the majority of us, it's not the most exciting job in the human body, right? It can still a little bit dull, insipid, boring, lackluster. So now when you see this word jejune, you might think of the jejunum and it's sort of unflashy or maybe uninspiring job, but also a very important job, just calling that out. So coming up with the next step is to look for these additional example sentences that contain this word. As I called out in our vocabulary resources, those come with example sentences that often go overlooked. It's typically a mistake to overlook that. You want to read that sentence at least once and get a sense for how is this being used appropriately in context, and then maybe look up for another additional example sentence or create one that contains that word. That's also going to really be helpful in retaining that word. So let's try this out. If you were to come up and write an example sentence using either blinkered or jejune, or if you're feeling super brave, try to use both, how would you do that? Throw that into the Q&A, and we'll take a look at a few of those live. I'm going to give everyone probably about a minute or two to do this. All right, I see some great responses coming in here. If you're on YouTube too, try this out. Go ahead and throw those sentences to Mika as well. Maybe she can give you some feedback as well. But maybe 30 more seconds to get your responses in, and then we're going to take a look at a few. All right, if you're still working on yours, no worries, get it to us when you're ready. But what I'm going to do here is I'm actually just dragging in, this is just a Google Doc that Brian and I are sharing so that I can see what you all are posting in our Q&A feed. So let's do, I love to do this, let's just jump in the middle, all right? So what is this one, what's this sentence that we've come up with here? Though a bit jejune, the process of learning vocabulary, oh, love it, through searching for etymology is certainly not a blinkered one. Okay, so what I like, the use of jejune here is good, right? And again, these example sentences are for you, so they can be personal to your perception of learning vocabulary. What I would push back on a little bit is you want to make sure that, let's say 3 or 4 weeks goes by and you're coming back and revisiting your example sentence. You want to make sure you've given yourself enough clues to pick up on the relevancy of this word. So in this case, I think jejune does a fair job. I don't know that blinkered necessarily is communicated well here. Through searching of etymology is certainly not a blinkered one. Again, this could sort of be, it's a little bit vague. It could refer to a number of different traits. So give yourself a little bit something more to go on, right? And maybe that means, searching for etymology is certainly not a blinkered one because it approaches the subject widely and comprehensively, right? It gives you some sort of contrast to what blinkered isn't. So that's another way you could make this a better example sentence. How about down here? Relying only on vocab for a good score on the GRE is a blinkered, okay, so blinkered is great, and jejune approach, okay? You should make it more fun with adding question practices. I like what's going on here. I would probably separate this out though. Give one sentence to blinkered here, and I like that you're referencing a study approach, that's awesome. Bump jejune to this second part and say that you should avoid making the process overly jejune and make it more fun by adding question practices. Because that's going to sort of separate these two words, which are very different, and make sure that you comprehend how each one's being used appropriately. All right, how about the top one? Studying can get jejune, we have a blinkered approach towards it. Once again, I think the words are being used correctly. Give yourself something more to go on. And in fact, I recommend making these examples like colorful, ridiculous. Spell these kind of words out really clearly of like, this is what this word means in context, so that you really, really have a firm grip on it moving forward. One more. There are some people who think Harry Potter is jejune, but in truth they are blinker-headed. I can't say I've ever seen the phrase blinker-headed before, but I really like it. I'm going to steal it. So again, I think this is okay, but again, jejune here is a little bit vague. You want something that really would spell out to you as a future reader that jejune means dull, insipid, lackluster, boring. So give yourself a little bit more to go on here. But these are all great. Thank you for submitting these. We're going to have more occasions to do this in our class today. But that's the kind of thing that you might want to do because even using a word once is going to do this cool thing in your brain where your brain says, hey, that word belongs to me now. And writing your own example sentence is a great way to do that. Here are a couple other just possible examples that I came up with. Having only watched the movie version of Romeo and Juliet, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Carlos knew he had a terribly blinkered understanding of Shakespeare's huge collection of work. He's only watched a movie based on one play. Yeah, it's a pretty narrow or limited understanding of Shakespeare's work. Cool. Shauna warned her students that leaving behind their maps and relying only on a compass would blinker their navigation skills. Yeah, I mean, a compass just tells you which way is north. Very useful, but definitely a more narrow or limited way of navigating than a map. And finally, while Grace found her blind date to be attractive, his personality was too jejune to warrant a second date. Bummer. It happens to all of us. All right. The next step, step 5, is then to add this word to your stack of flashcards. So if you discovered this word while reading the news or watching television, find some way to keep track of it. And so you might write down, of course, your word, your definition, maybe throw some replacement words, maybe just a good synonym, limited, narrow, singular, cool. I'm like building up this kind of web of words. That's helpful. Maybe the etymology, again, if you have time and you're interested, and then throw that example sentence on there. If you have all of this on a flashcard, that's a lot of context to work with. It's going to give you a richer association to attach to that word. Now, the rest of the steps are sort of performative. You have to be reviewing these things. It's very uncommon that people can see a word once and just automatically keep it forever. So you have to be reviewing and change it up. Rather than quizzing yourself, ask your spouse or roommate or friend or sibling to quiz you occasionally. That's going to put you on the spot. This is the 7th of the 7 steps, and it's my favorite, is find some chance to use this word in your life. Be brave, everyone. We should never be ashamed about our vocabulary. I drove my friends and family crazy when I was studying for the GRE because I was always trying to use these new words. And yeah, it makes you sound kind of obnoxious, but hey, it helped me retain them. And if you can explain to everyone that, hey, I'm using these words for this purpose, that's going to help you out a lot. And it doesn't have to be in conversation. It can be. You could do it in a text or an email or find a way in your undergraduate essays or final papers to use a couple of these words. For example, I could have called today's class How to Learn or How to Study GRE Vocabulary, but I had an opportunity and I didn't want to miss it. Assimilate means to take something in and understand it fully. And that's a better, more precise word than learn. So I used it, right? So look for chances to do that in your own communication as well. So here's our 7 steps all spelled out on the page. Now, one thing I want to call out. You might not do this for every word. In fact, there's no way that you could. It is very time intensive. But if you're someone who is finding I'm missing questions because I routinely am missing this one word, I get it confused with another word, I'm having a tough time holding on to it, this is the kind of process that's really going to help you build up some confidence in holding on to that word in perpetuity. So it's a good method to even take certain steps from. Maybe your own thing is only a 3-step method, but at least this gives you some idea as to how you can, some alternatives for approaching this process and making it kind of fun. So let's take another break for some questions. I know Mika and Brian have been keeping track of some. What do we got?
Okay, let's clear a couple of these Zoom ones and then let's jump into some YouTube ones. So sort of variation on a similar question. I've been studying for a month of vocab, or my test is in a month, and I'm still struggling. What are the sort of tricks to make this assimilate better and so that I can start to see progress in my vocabulary study?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is consistency. And I would say setting aside, time every single day and time that is focused. that you're free of distractions. It's something that you maybe hopefully look forward to doing and set a time limit on. So for example, if you're struggling, maybe this is a matter of just like you got to change up your routine. Set a time where, you know what, the first thing I do when I wake up, I'm going to get up half an hour earlier. I'm going to make coffee. I'm going to sit down outside on my patio, and I'm going to spend 30 to 40 minutes just learning and reviewing words. That consistency is going to pay off as long as you set aside focused, quiet time for it. Now, other things you can do, especially if you have a month to go, is, again, be strategic here. We at Magoosh preach this throughout. You got to be strategic in your approach. So, looking at where you're at, you want to focus on what are the highest payoffs for my time. What words are going to, more commonly appear in the GRE? If I take a practice test, hey, I'm really going to focus on all of those words because they came up in say it's an ETS practice test. That's a good sign that ETS is aware of and likes those words for testing purposes. So this is where focus on those common decks. Focus on some of those basic decks. Set yourself good goals, reasonable goals, maybe 15 to 20 new words. Because think about it. If you do 20 new words a day over 30 days, that's 600 words. That is a crazy number of words, right? And so if you can do that, you're going to be in great shape. It's just going to take some consistent application. So that'd be my advice there. What other questions do we have, Brian?
So sort of building on that, you mentioned like learning 10 new words a day, but I forget those 10 words every day. What am I supposed to do to work through that?
So there's a number of techniques here. This is where application is the best policy. So one thing I've done in the past when I tutor students is I've had students in the past that are struggling in the same way. They can't keep those 10 words. And one thing I've asked them to do is, hey, write me a paragraph and use those 10 words in that paragraph. Maybe 2 paragraphs if it's easier. But just basically doing exactly what we did, which is coming up with good example sentences that correctly and appropriately use those words. And so that can be part of your vocab prep, is at night, after you've learned those words in the morning, come back, set aside 20 minutes, write out a paragraph or 2 using those words. And again, I promise you, even using it one time, your brain is going to want to hold on to it. It's going to say, hey, this word belongs to me now. I've used it, so I know what it means. And so try that out. Other techniques are, again, use these words in conversation, in text messages. Find someone that can quiz you at night. I used to have my wife, Sarah, quiz me all the time just to make sure I was really holding on to these words. So change it up and find some way to apply what you've learned every single day. How about 1 or 2 more questions here?
Sure. So how much time is required to build vocabulary? Is 2 months enough?
It's really going to depend on your score goals. Again, so if you're someone who is shooting for a really ambitious score, let's say a 160 plus, 2 months is possible, but that might be a kind of a truncated window if you're coming in not having a really good foundation in vocabulary. I find that students that come from, say, humanities backgrounds, who are accustomed to reading a lot of history, literature, modern, news, journalistic publications, they tend to do better here because they're already in that groove of learning new words all the time. So if that's you, 2 months might be a great window. But if you're someone who's coming from a background where, hey, I haven't had to really read and learn much vocabulary in the last couple of years of my life, maybe that means adding another month, giving yourself more of that window and that cushion to sort of ease into the process and find what works for you. What else do we have, Brian? Maybe 1 or 2 more.
Yeah, so I think this one will piggyback off that. I have 3 days left before my exam. What am I supposed to do?
First thing is you should relax. We don't recommend cramming hard in 3 days. If anything, you should ease off a little bit. This is where go into your vocabulary flashcard app. Go through the first couple of decks. Just see how you're doing on those words that maybe you haven't seen them in a while. Like maybe you went through those decks in your first week of your study prep and you haven't seen them for a few months. So this is where, hitting those kind of high frequency, high payoff words first, and don't do a million of them a day. Again, sort of like, I'm going to review maybe, 1 or 2 decks here, just see if I'm feeling good. I'm going to do my, 20 practice problems under timed pressure. Were there any words that came up there that I wasn't familiar with? You're just doing touch-ups at this point. You definitely don't want to cram. You want to go into your test feeling rested and confident in all the other skills that you've built up. So just try to relax, be strategic in your approach, and just don't overdo it with a couple days left. How about 1 more quick one?
Okay. How should I balance like how much time I'm studying learning vocab versus how much I'm actually practicing the questions where I'm using this vocabulary?
Sure, and this is where I think, again, setting aside some dedicated time for vocab is good, especially if it's something that you maybe kind of don't look forward to doing every day. Find some way to make it fun, but maybe you can set aside that 30 minutes. But also, one of my favorite things about the apps is that they're available on mobile. So if you have a phone and you're going throughout your busy day and you're running errands and you go to Starbucks and you're waiting in line, instead of checking Instagram or TikTok, do some vocab practice. Just sort of make that build that into the little cracks throughout your day so that you are doing some work actively, even though you're not sitting at your desk studying for the GRE. So that would be my advice there. In terms of balancing between vocab and practice questions, it's really going to depend on how you're performing, what your score goals are, and sort of how much time you have left, right? But this is where, again, the GRE is testing a variety of skills, so don't be learning vocabulary at the expense of building up those other really essential skills throughout the test. Excellent questions, everyone. I am positive there's a bunch out there that we are hoping to get to in our next break, but we have a little bit more work to do. So let's talk about some techniques for making the really tricky words memorable. What can we do if, let's say, we go through? Here's another example. We're reading a book, and this sentence comes up. The writer adopted a saturnine voice in her prose, relying on the image of a dead and decaying marigold to symbolize her gradual descent from joy to permanent gloom. Wow, I wrote that sentence and it's a huge bummer. But it does a good job of communicating this word, right? Our first approach should be to do exactly what we just did with blinkered. Follow all those 7 steps. That's going to help us build that rich connection to that word. But let's say that fails. We go through all those steps, and for whatever reason, this word we're just kind of getting duped by this word over and over. This is where some other techniques might come into play. So the first one I call rhythms and rhymes. It's incredibly silly, but it works. So saturnine is a word that means of a person or their manner, slow and gloomy. Actually, the etymology is fascinating here. It has connections to lead poisoning and a Greek god. Again, etymologies are super cool, everyone. But this rhythm and rhyme techniques is sort of like, well, what does the word sound like? Saturnine. Well, it kind of sounds like sad to turn 9, maybe? And so maybe my little silly example is Jamal loved being 8 years old so much that he was sad to turn 9. Cool. That is like, again, it's really silly, but every time I see this word saturnine now, I think sad turn 9. I think of this example, and that makes it memorable for me. Now, how about another example? Galvanize, which means to shock or excite someone into taking action. We also do this to metals to make them more rust resistant. Again, words are cool, everyone. But it kind of sounds like Gavin's eyes. Maybe. It's kind of a stretch, but it works. And so maybe my example sentence is, Lola couldn't help but become excited when she looked into Gavin's eyes. Aw, that's pretty cute. And once again, though, once you kind of come up with this silly kind of rhythm and rhyme example, make sure you do set out to write an actual example sentence with the correct word. So the manager's rousing speech galvanized her staff so intensely they sold more cars in one day than they had in the previous 2 months. Haha, cool. Now I see this word galvanized. I'm still going to think of Gavin's eyes, and hey, that's going to work out for me. So find some, even if it's really silly and ridiculous, that's often the most memorable way to go. Now there's other things we can do as well if we're feeling stuck. Roots of words. I get this question a lot. How important is it that I spend time learning word roots, studying Latin, studying Greek? You don't have to go that far down the rabbit hole, but it's worth noticing when GRE words do have common roots. So here's another, again, I'm reading, and this sentence comes up. Had Kenneth not been known for his veracity, his parents would have seriously doubted his story about jumping over the entire creek on his mountain bike. Now, whereas etymologies are sort of the origins of words, they tell us where words come from, roots are different. They're sort of common components of many different words at once, and so they are very useful if you can recognize them. So how does this look in action? Well, our word is veracity, which means conformity to facts or accuracy. Cool. And it's sort of it's a virtue. It's someone that we tend to describe people in terms of their veracity. But a second definition is habitual truthfulness. Okay, so they're related here. Facts, accuracy, truth, all of that sort of is coalescing around this word. So the root is a Latin root. It's verax, which means true or truthful. So then how can we use this to learn or make educated guesses on a variety of words? Well, there's related roots, which is verus, which means true, related to the goddess Veritas. Again, everyone, words are super cool. Who's the goddess of truth. And here's some other words with the same shared root. And each of these is a GRE vocab word. Verify. If we verify something, we make sure it's accurate, right? Verisimilitude. Now, maybe that's a word you would see on a test and go, oh my goodness, that is a crazy word. But hey, you know what? It's got this very root, this very beginning. So maybe it has that same relation to verax. And verisimilitude is sort of like accuracy or truthfulness. Cool. And verity, which again is sort of a noun. It's a peculiar word, but it's a word that also means sort of truthfulness or reality, right? So this is where learning a single root can help us build some connections to words that maybe we don't recognize right away, but we see their kind of shared ancestry. Now, quick caveat here. Any of you who have studied the English language know that English borrows from everywhere. Roots and from other languages which look similar but aren't actually identical. So this is not a bulletproof strategy. But if we're in a position where we see a word that we can't remember or just plainly don't know, this is something, right? It might be helpful in educating a guess. And this is something I really like to preach. Like, go on anything, any kind of hunch, no matter how far-fetched, is better than wildly guessing. Now, the other thing we can do in studying words and being detectives is looking at things like prefixes. So many words contain kind of clues in the form of prefixes. And by getting familiar with some of the common ones, we can increase our odds of guessing correctly. So what does that look like? Well, consider the word malfeasance. And before just jumping to a definition, think of some words. What are some other words that start with that same prefix mal? Go ahead and throw those in the Q&A. I just would like to take a look at a few of them. All right, so we just have a ton. We have maleficent, malignant, malpractice, malice, malfunction, malware, malevolent, malign. Wow, this is awesome. That's actually a really, really great constellation of words. So keep those in mind. And what we should start doing, this is where if we see this as an answer choice, and I don't know this word, that's one of the first things I do is, what does it sound like? Are there words that sound similar? Do I know what those words mean? And so, for example, we might come up with words like malnourished, malady, maladjusted, malevolent, all of your fine words. And then we should ask, is there a commonality in this that would tell me something about the real operation of the prefix mal? Well, if we consider each of them, then mal probably means kind of bad or evil or poor in quality. If you're malnourished, you're poorly nourished. A malady is an illness. Maladjusted means poorly adjusted. Malevolent might mean bad or even evil, right? So hey, these have a relationship because of this prefix mal. So now coming back to our word, malfeasance, well, hey, that means wrongdoing, especially by a public official. And of course, like I said, you want to have your example sentence locked and loaded. The city councilor's long record of malfeasance ruled him out as a candidate for the chair of the ethics board position. Yeah, you don't get to be the chair of the ethics board if you have a history of public wrongdoing. So again, this is where these are things that when we are feeling the pressure and we're seeing words that we can't remember or we just don't recognize, this is something we can do to narrow that field down. All right, final takeaways. Now we're going to have ample time for questions, which is awesome. So here's my big picture advice. Build vocabulary studying into a routine. A little bit every day is really going to be a lot better than cramming a couple of days a week. So just make it part of your life during this period of preparing for the GRE. Use high quality resources such as our apps and our ebook. Follow that stepwise approach. Have some kind of method in place for when you encounter a new word. Find ways to make those really difficult words stick. Maybe that's a mnemonic or a wacky example sentence. Use the other things like etymologies and roots and prefixes to build a richer context around a word. Review, and again, I cannot preach this enough. Use these words or lose them. I want to call out that yes, Learning vocabulary for the GRE can feel like, what an obnoxious hoop to jump through. But it's a lifelong skill, and if you're going into graduate school, being able to come in comfortable using a wide variety of words that are appropriate, with great precision, that perfectly capture the idea or concept you're trying to articulate, no matter what you're studying, that's going to serve you well. So make sure you just start becoming a person who enjoys learning and using new words. It's going to serve you well in grad school. It's going to serve you well in life. Soapbox over. That's just my big pitch to everyone here. Vocabulary is important, and it's really actually a lot of fun, I think. So now we have the rest of our time. Let's take questions. So Brian, we'll start with you. What do we have?
Yeah, we got a ton here. So we'll bundle some of this stuff here. As we're learning vocab words, should we be focusing on parts of speech, nouns, verbs, adjectives? Should we be learning things like grammar as well? Does that matter as much?
Great point. So this is where I'd say yes. And the best way that you can improve on that is, again, writing those example sentences or using it correctly in your life. Because in order to do that, you have to know, well, is blinkered a noun, a verb, an adjective? Can it be both? Is there a noun form of this word that I should be familiar with and recognize? So yeah, I think that's and that's where on your flashcards, it is going to tell you that as well. This word is a noun. And again, we've included those example sentences for that reason. So that if it's something like an adjective or an adverb, you can see how it looks and feels in context. And again, if you can do that on text completion, of also saying like, well, what is this blank as a part of speech? Well, it has to be either an adjective or a noun or an adverb. Now, typically your answer choices are all going to still fall into the correct part of speech, because otherwise it'd be a total giveaway if you're looking for a noun, but you have a verb in your answer choices. That's pretty uncommon, but it's going to help you at least start to determine, okay, I need a noun here. What kind of noun? Is it a positive sounding noun, a negative sounding noun? That alone is going to help you narrow that field considerably. So yeah, be building grammar and that parts of speech knowledge as you apply these words in your life as well. What else do we have?
Just want to call out, I am getting a ton of share requests for that handout. I don't know why. I put the link back in there again. It should be open to all of you, so just keep playing with those links and they will open eventually. What do we have here as questions? So in Magoosh, there's all these words, but they appear in random order when you're going through these flashcards. Do you have any strategy for like how we should be working our way through these decks and flashcards?
That is a really great point. So again, I think that's where the decks themselves are sort of like the nice organizational device, where like each deck is 51 words. And so it just gives you like an opportunity to keep those 51 words in one place. And I do recommend start at the beginning. Go at Common Deck 1. Because again, like we're putting out our like the heaviest hitters first. Like definitely you got to know that deck backwards and forwards, because like you're almost guaranteed to see some of those words on a test. Now beyond that, I've worked with students in the past that like to do things like keeping words that are related or synonymous, or even antonyms together in some kind of place. So maybe if that helps you, sort of like, I like to see words that are all very similar together, then you can do that through Quizlet. You can come up with your own flashcards. And I'll say that's one advantage of the ebook, is the ebook is broken down into word lists, and those words have some kind of commonality. So again, if that's easier for you in seeing words all together that mean similar things in a group, definitely use that ebook as a resource. What else do we have?
Sorry, I am on mute. Let's see here. So, any tips on how we could go about finding these roots and etymologies? Is this something that Magoosh offers?
It's not something that we offer much. We do have some great blog posts that do break down certain roots and prefixes. If you just search vocabulary or roots or prefixes in our blog, you'll definitely have some of those resources. I believe most of those are included in that handout as well, so that you have them in one place. But otherwise, hey, this is where like even going on Wikipedia or going on Merriam-Webster's website. And the website I included for etymologies is etymonline.com. Though that should tell you a lot about certain roots and where they come from and the kinds of services or functions they provide in a variety of words. So use all the resources you have available to kind of track down some of those roots. What else do we have?
Cool. Word lists versus flashcards. Is one of those better than the other?
I wouldn't say better. Again, this depends on the person. So if you're someone, for example, if you're someone that has a very strong visual memory, you're a visual learner, and I'm one of these people, I tend to actually do better with word lists because when I see a word, and this used to happen on tests, I could remember exactly where in my handwritten notes, like what part of the page, oh, this was in the bottom right corner, this is under this section, this is what that meant. So for me, visual memory is really important. And if you're the same way, then absolutely. Those word lists can be really good resources. If you're not that way, if you're someone that prefers to see things kind of one at a time, to really focus in on them, to do more of that sort of immersive, writing those example sentences, that is another technique as well. So I would just say investigate what's your personal learning style. Are you a better auditory or visual or immersive learner? And then lean into that. Find some kind of vocab resource that will provide that for you. All right, still plenty of time. What else do we have?
Okay, so we're going to bundle a bunch of these from YouTube that have come in different forms. What do I need to do to prep to break that 160 number for the verbal side here?
All right, so obviously today's focus is vocab. You got to be doing a lot of vocab. That means if you're going to break that 160 plus, that means you've at least probably at least gotten through the advanced decks. You might not have every single word mastered, but you've at least seen them all before. You have to give yourself a fighting chance on those advanced questions to get that 160 plus. Now, a couple of qualifications or caveats there. Getting a 160 plus means a variety of things. Yes, it means that you are accustomed with the question types, the concepts being tested. You have strategies for approaching reading comprehension passages of a variety of lengths. It also means you're really good at skipping and pacing. That is a huge skill on the GRE that goes overlooked. To get a 160 plus, basically you have to be really choosy with how you spend your time, especially if you get sorted into that second harder adaptive section on the verbal side. That's where pretty much every question is going to be medium hard or very hard. And the real challenge is which of these points can I grab in the time that I have? And which questions am I just plainly not willing to spend and waste too much of my time because I don't like my chances here. So for example, if you have a super sophisticated, advanced, triple blank text completion question that's almost a paragraph in length, and there's some really hard vocab in the answer choices, that's going to take time. It just is. It's going to take 3 to 4 minutes probably to crack. I would rather do that at the very end, if at all. If I don't get there and I have to plug in guesses, I'm okay with that as long as I've spent my time working on the 16, 17 other questions that I did feel really good about. So getting that 160 plus means that you are strategic in that way as well. And the very last thing I would add, this is for everyone, not just for those of you trying to get that 160 plus. You have to be reading. There is no way around it. The students that do well on this side of the test are readers because that's going to improve your reading speed, your comprehension, your writing is going to improve on the AWA by doing that. Your vocabulary is going to be much more natural. So again, I can't preach that enough. Set aside dedicated time throughout your week, maybe every day, for a little bit of reading. Even if it's only 5 to 10 pages, it's better than nothing. So that is my my last plea to all of you trying to improve on the verbal side. All right, what else do we have? That was a long answer.
So we'll take this in, probably did this backwards. But on the flip side of that, I'm stuck trying to break that 150 number, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do to change my approach and get over that hurdle. What can I do to get through that wall?
So 2 things I would call out. The first is to, again, be strategic. Focus on what's the breakdown of a general verbal section. And actually, Brian, maybe if you have a second, you can share out that blog post. We have a great post in our blog that breaks down the frequency of different question types on the verbal side and the frequency of certain concepts. And that is super useful if you're trying to break that 150 mark. So for example, a lot of students get really hung up and stressed out about the long passage questions. And understandably, right? It's a lot of reading. It's hard to find information. The good news is that statistically speaking, you're only likely to see one long passage between the 2 sections you're graded on. Yes, it's going to have 3 or 4 questions attached to it. But honestly, knowing that, I would rather work on almost everything else first. That long question is going to come pretty much at the end of my section. I'm going to strive to hit maybe one or two of those questions, maybe like the big main idea question if there is one, and let the other ones go. So even getting to that 150 mark means that you're being really choosy with how you spend your time. And the last thing I would say with getting that 150 mark is you have to be learning from your mistakes. The highest performers on both sides of the test, quant and verbal, are students that really are disciplined about spending time analyzing where they went wrong on each question. So if you're at that point, take a practice test. Take a Magoosh practice test or an ETS practice test, and then set aside a block of time for just reviewing how it went. On the questions that you missed, why did you miss them? Is it vocab? Is it purely because you just didn't know enough of the words? Were you rushing through the question? Did you make a silly mistake on the question? Is there something in the passage that you were confused on or kind of glossed over? So this is where, again, investigate where you went wrong. This is the only way we improve. And if you can spend time doing that and isolating the couple of areas of, oh, you know what, I missed 5 out of 6 text completion questions on this section. Well, maybe I work on vocab, maybe I revisit some lesson videos, maybe I just change up my approach a little bit and slow down through those areas. So again, you have to be doing that self-reflection in order to find out your weaknesses and improve on them. All right, another long answer, but an important one. So what else do we have?
All right, so this sort of is a follow-up to everything we've said here. We keep talking about aiming for like a high score, your target score, but especially for like our YouTube people who are maybe just getting into the GRE, what is that good score? How do we think about that target score? I know this is a huge loaded question that we'll squeeze into a minute here, but like, how do we think about what that score we need is?
Here's my short answer. A good score, or the best score on the GRE for you, is a score that gets you that acceptance letter. It's as simple as that. So that's where I really, really preach all of you who are just starting out on this journey. Do some research now. Get in touch, go on your program websites, get in touch with their graduate and admissions staff. Ask them pointed questions about, hey, what are the required or recommended GRE scores for admissions? What are the recommended scores to be competitive for funding and teaching assistantships? Get that information, and these staff members should have it on hand for you. Use that as your score goals, rather than saying like, oh, well, my program only requires a 150 or better, but I'd really like to get a 165 because it would feel awesome. 100%. But I just want to call out that applying to grad school is a ton of work. This is just one component in a bigger, richer, complex puzzle that you're pulling together and presenting to an admissions committee. So don't overemphasize the GRE at the expense of those other components. Set realistic, accurate score goals. Take regular practice tests to see how you're measuring up against them. That's going to save you a lot of stress and hopefully save you a lot of time in your preparation as well. All right, I think I made it in under a minute, or just about. Thanks, everyone. This was so much fun. I really enjoyed this. I hope you did as well. If you are on YouTube, again, this is your promo code. Make sure you keep track of it so you get that $50 discount. And as always, you can always reach us at help@magoosh.com. We're here for you to get you started on this journey and make it more effective and more enjoyable. So go out, learn some new words, use those new words, and we hope to see you in a future class. All right, thanks, everyone.